Hey everyone, and welcome to Slack Frontiers. I am Katie Burke. I'm the Chief People Officer at HubSpot, which is a CRM company in Boston. And I am super excited to be joined by CEOs from some of the most amazing tech companies on earth. I can't wait for you to hear from these amazing folks on how they're navigating change with a specific focus on people and culture, two topics near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to do some quick introductions around the horn. Let me know if I missed anything. I'm going to skip. These folks are illustrious. They've done everything on earth. So in the interest of time, and because I know people have been in a lot of Zooms, I'm actually just going to do a quick intro and title, and then a fun fact that I found about you on the internet, which you can feel free to tell me is true or false. Does that sound okay to everybody? So given that, what I'm going to do is get started with intros. Stewart, since you are our home field advantage, I think I'm going to start with you if that's okay. So Stewart Butterfield is the CEO of Slack, and oh, by the way, our host with the most. And what I understand about you, Stewart, is that you have a new dog. Like so many people in the pandemic, you have acquired a dog named Lenny. True or false?
True.
How did you decide on Lenny, and how is having a puppy in the middle of a pandemic going?
The good part is it's a second puppy. So we have a dog who's like maybe 13 months old, and Lenny's 6 months. So they take care of each other a little bit more than any one dog alone. And Lenny, and I mean this in a very loving way, because he's a little bit of a loser.
But you know what? Isn't that nice that in quarantine, when everyone is trying to like win at life, that Lenny is just not? Like Lenny is not. That's a good thing. That is a gift to us all.
He's got a great spirit, real can-do attitude. He's a go-getter, but a little awkward.
It's hard to make dog friends during these times.
Yeah, that's true.
Hard to make dog friends, human friends, you name it. So Aaron, given that you jumped in, let's go to you next. Aaron Levie, CEO of Box, and also, as I understand it, a very avid ABBA fan. True or false?
I would say probably half true, but I probably need to update my my Twitter page a little bit on that one. But I like all forms of music.
What are you listening to in quarantine these days?
A lot of emo punk, actually. So it's really bringing out, being stuck in a room for 6 months is bringing out my my teenage emo angst years.
I absolutely love that. You're not alone. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Jennifer Tejada is the CEO of PagerDuty and works as hard at being the CEO of PagerDuty as she does at being proud to be, as I understand it, a University of Michigan grad. So I have a question for you, Jennifer. Your thoughts on Tom Brady? I'm here in Boston, so I have to, under contract, ask you about Tom Brady.
Look, Michigan is all about leaders and best. I think Tom got off to a slightly slow start for the season, but I think he's going to be great.
I 100% agree and share your love of him. So thank you for sharing and welcome. And last but certainly not least, Eric Yuan, CEO of Zoom, who is carrying the country and the universe on his back right now. And as I understand it, is a huge Golden State Warriors fan. Eric, true or false?
True. Very true. I miss them.
I love it. Thank you all for being game. The internet has some ups and downs, as you know, but thanks for being game to share beyond just your bio. Let's talk about people and culture. So you all, this has been an unprecedented time. We can't talk about these times without calling them unprecedented. What as leaders have you felt super prepared for, and what surprised you and kind of caught you off guard? If it's okay, Jennifer, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I think the thing I felt super prepared for is we're already pretty transparent and communicative. So the need to get in front of your employees more effectively, to check in on your teams, to really connect with folks, ramping that up into a higher velocity came pretty easy to us. And I think we spend a lot of time focusing on establishing trust, both with our employees as well as our customers and users. So that foundation of trust benefits you when, particularly in an environment where employees are coming to their leaders for perspective on what's happening in the world, not just what's happening at work. And so I'm really pleased that all those investments we've made over the years and the constant discipline and effort and experimentation on finding ways to demonstrate transparency, be open, learn openly, that has helped us to, I think, continue to build on that connection through what's been a difficult time for a lot of our employees and a lot of our customers.
Absolutely. And on the flip side, what surprised you or kind of caught you off guard?
Well, one, how long this was going to take. I mean, I've been through a few recessions before. I know they aren't kind of an overnight thing, but I think we're all feeling some sense of fatigue. I mean, Eric just said he misses going to games. I miss going anywhere. Like, I even miss getting on planes and having quiet time on a plane, on the way to and from something. So just the sustained nature of this and the fact that we don't know when we'll be able to return to a more physically collaborative environment. That's meant we've had to scenario plan for a lot of different scenarios.
I definitely share that. I have a distinct memory of leaving the office and thinking this would be like a 2-week kind of like camp style field trip, like see you in a few weeks and it'll be great. And I think back, like what a foolish sentiment to have even had. And I think we're all definitely feeling that. So thanks for leading the way. Eric, how about you as a leader? What was something that you as a CEO kind of felt super prepared for? And then on the contrast, what was something that caught you by surprise?
I think, first of all, we are very well prepared, to deal with uncertainties. And back to what Jennifer said, the trust always there. And, the trust with the customer, partners, with our employees. And even if we are facing all kinds of challenges, and I think we are very well prepared. No one complaining. We all work so hard, right, to deal with those uncertainties. I think what surprised me is, first of all, I'm so surprised Warriors is not in the playoff game. And another thing, and we built Zoom for enterprise customers. I never thought about that. Wow, you can use Zoom for the yoga class and also for the Zoom marriage is legal in New York, right? A lot of new use cases.
Eric, you forgot one more. Rosh Hashanah, Zoom Rosh Hashanah has gone completely gangbusters.
Right on. Yes, that's another big happy surprise. So.
Yeah, the high holidays are much more fun when you make them dynamic in Zoom, as I understand it. So fantastic. And mazel tov to anyone who celebrated their Rosh Hashanah on Zoom. And I remember seeing my first Zoom wedding and thinking like, going back to the time frame thing of thinking like, how novel and cool. And now it's like your friend's getting Zoom married, like it's another Saturday night, right? We're all used to it. Aaron, do you mind jumping in here? What's one thing that has been totally natural to you and one thing that's caught you by surprise?
Yeah, I think building on Jen and Eric, culture, this is definitely a moment where your values are completely kind of tested to the extreme. And so if you happen to be fortunate and have codified those values in your cultural norms, years ago, and those are kind of reinforced in all of the behavior and actions of the organization, then when you went virtual, in many cases, you could continue just to build on that and benefit from that. So, at Box, we have values around blowing our customers' minds and building a very customer-centric organization, moving quickly, operating like an owner. So thinking about, how are we, executing with the greatest amount of impact that we can. So all of those things, I think we've benefited from, and we've been super happy about. I think some of the actually positive surprises are, in many ways, how productive we have been, even despite the broader challenges going on and all the different disruptions that I think people are facing. The resilience of the organization, the fact that collaborating virtually actually brings a bunch of positives that are frankly pretty exciting around what the future of work looks like. So we're hoping we can carry some of those things back in when we do go back to the office and when something emerges as whatever the new normal is. I will say I completely vehemently disagree with Jen. I'm not looking forward to airplane flights at any point. So that's a shocking revelation that you would prefer to be on an airplane for quiet time. But I am not. I do not miss that part of business life.
I kind of love that Jen started coming in on a hot take with missing a plane. I would agree with you, Aaron. I'm not in the camp. I don't miss that pain in my shoulder or neck, the low-grade pain that we all live with. But I do respect that, Jen. I do respect the quiet time of just having the sanity to read a book or get through some work and crank. So I can see both sides of this very important and highly polarizing issue.
I think it has to do with being a mom. So the plane is an escape for me. There's no one who needs anything from me in that seat, which is
your needs of other people go up by like 10x. I'm just picturing the pilot getting on saying we're going to be grounded for 2 more hours and we just have to wait for the mechanic to come. But I guess if that's a meditative moment, that's great.
Yep, just go zen, take a longer nap.
Yeah, I don't miss when that delay notification came. Also, the eating or drinking at a horrible chain restaurant just adjacent to your gate. I don't miss that either. So
let's be clear.
pros and
I
cons.
do not miss airports.
I love that, Jen. Thanks for sharing. Last but certainly not least, Stewart, how about you?
Well, I got to say, I feel like everyone was significantly better prepared for this than I would say that we were. I hesitate to do this because this is a Slack gig, but I think our use of Slack was pretty essential in making the transition, just because we already had this not fully formed, and I think there's still room for improvement, but we already had this habit of trying to document things in a way that was visible to other people and kind of build an archive. And so when people join teams, they have a little bit of history and there's continuity. We're really concerned both as a company and I think on the product side on finding ways to increase the return on the effort that people put into communication. And I'll say that I'm still learning this. You know, there's been a designer who works at Slack once asked if they could record the review meetings for product reviews because everyone disagreed about what I meant or what I said after the meeting. So I thought, okay, there's a problem that I have to solve independent of any of this. But for the first time, it was tough to schedule a little bit of feedback and I wanted to send something over. So I used Loom. I don't know if you know that product, but you kind of record yourself in the corner and do a screen grab and could draw on the screen and I'm giving all this feedback and I sent it over and it took probably less time than scheduling the meeting and getting everyone on and stuff like that. But it was accessible to everyone else and they kind of give a little bit more demonstrative power. So that was pretty impactful. And we're continuing to look at ways to find things, find ways to replace processes that today must be synchronous with asynchronous stuff. The surprising stuff was just and I could be wrong about this still, the magnitude of the change, because I'm trying to play things out, and there's a lot of people in various parts of the country and certainly various parts of the world who are back in their offices, not totally normal, obviously, but some people are back. I just read in The Economist, 84% of French office workers are back in the office, which was shocking to me. Nevertheless, there's a chain of consequences, and every day that goes by, I think we shift further, and the ramifications will be longer lived. So I just hired a new Chief People Officer. Go people.
Congratulations on Nadia. She's amazing.
Thank you. So that was the first hire that I personally did during this period. And it was, it's a little, you got to go a little bit out on a limb, but I think it's now 20+% of our employees started post-pandemic. But the other thing about Nadia is she lives in Chicago. So she's the first one that isn't based here. And every kind of step we go down this path, every time an employee moves to be closer to family or to kind of move further out of the city, out of commuting range so they can have a bigger house or whatever it is, there's a bunch of consequences from that we can't unwind. So all of us as CEOs of software companies and a much broader community will say things like 10 years of digital transformation in 2 weeks or something like that. Well, we can have a contest to see who's doing it fastest.
The ratio is getting larger and larger over time.
Yeah, but aside from that, I think there's a lot of long-lived ramifications that are almost impossible to kind of predict how they play out, from future of cities, commercial real estate markets, how companies are structured, what tools become important, and all that.
So let's build on that, if that's okay, Stewart. One of the things that I always struggle with is you mentioned the headlines, the office is dead, long live the office, San Francisco is dead, long live San Francisco. And it really varies even by publication, let alone editor and journalist. How much as CEOs are you leading the way and thinking like, let's put our headphones on and just crank? And how much are you looking at those going, oh gosh, this company did this, we should be reacting? How much are you leading versus following on this stuff? Stewart, do you mind starting us? Sure.
I'm trying to think of a way to avoid saying that we're following. I think we're largely on our own. I mean, so this group, the four of us here, and a handful of other CEOs, including Brian from HubSpot, have been great in supporting one another through this process. I think we're going with a lot of questions, and it's almost never the case, maybe barring Scott Farquhar from Atlassian, that anyone has the answer in advance. We're all kind of figuring it out as we go. And So it's not so much leading versus following. It's this kind of mutual discovery and invention.
Can I just, having heard this structure, I think we have a new word. It's called fall leading. And
I like it.
And you really can't separate whether you're following or leading. And it's just, it's just this constant state of pretending like you're leading by following others. So
I think it's a great term. And I also think it's an important mindset. I think people look to all of you to have it all figured out. And I think what you're saying, Stewart, is to your exact point. You're not following, you're all learning and adopting a growth mindset coming in. And I think that's cool. Just to back up for folks who may not know, this group connects, as I understand it, on a weekly, but bi-weekly call, I should say, and regular Slack communications. And it's a bunch of tech CEOs who are all sharing best practices, data, and oh, by the way, asks for their respective teams. I will tell you as a recipient of those asks that we love that you're learning and growing together. It also creates, there's a shadow CHRO, CPO channel, which we won't talk about. That's like Fight Club. We don't talk about that here. But I do have to say, like, I think the commitment to mutual learning and learning together is really admirable. And I think it's really cool that you all are leading the way on that side of things. Has that community been helpful for you, Aaron, Jen, Eric? Maybe I'll start with you, Eric, and then go back to Jen and Aaron.
I think, first of all, I really like the new term for Aaron. That's exactly what's happening here. So first of all, we as a group, we learn from each other. We try to understand the dynamics. And it's, sometimes we're reactive, sometimes we're proactive. Again, we're still in the process of learning, especially after the pandemic crisis is over. What's the new future of the workplace look like? And again, full of uncertainty. But our approach is, learn from Stewart and Aaron and Jen, and also talk with our employees, solicit the feedback. I think we still have time. I think that's why, I think like this new term, always learn and follow.
I love it.
Yeah,
How about you?
I agree with that. I mean, it's been very collaborative, and I think, Stewart, you used the word supportive. There's a lot of camaraderie in that group, and it's not like we all knew each other for 100 years or have tons of things in common, but it can be a isolating job when you're running a business, not the least of which when you're doing it in a global pandemic that follows with a recession and then fires and who knows what's coming next, orange skies, you name it. It's just very comforting, but also inspiring to have a community of peers that you can bring a question to and get different perspectives through the lens of their experience, knowing that every company is going to experience this a little differently and every leader is going to experience this a little differently. I have really gained tremendously from being able to learn through observability, like watching others try things, and at the same time, even work through some things I'm thinking about with maybe teams that are a little bit ahead of me or teams that are a little behind me and have different questions. So I think we've all benefited from that collaboration, and I think the industry is benefiting from it. I'm certain our employees are benefiting from it too, because we're not walking in with kind of this know-it-all mindset, we must do this. We're all open to new ways. And we're also there's not a lot of ego in that discussion, that makes it amazing.
I think that's something that a lot of people will be surprised by. Most of the notes, and I'm guessing all of your respective CHROs and CPOs are in the same boat. All the notes that I get are about, we might have missed enough focus on this group, or how can we pay more attention to parents, or here's something that people are doing at this company that really reflects around mental health. Here's something that Stewart or Aaron or Eric or Jen said that really stuck with me. And I just think if people overheard the conversations, they'd be surprised at how much is focused on empathy, people, culture, doing the right thing, ethics, versus I have not gotten one note about revenue, productivity. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure that's on all of your minds, but I think it's really cool how much you all are talking about people and culture things when no one else is watching.
Don't worry, we're sending those notes to the heads of sales. So
I was going to say, I don't have, maybe I'm just not on the distro list, and that's
channel.
totally fine by me. Yeah. Aaron, how about for you? How has the group helped you?
I think it's been fantastic. I think, I don't know if Jen, if you termed this earlier in this call or at a different way, but it definitely feels probably more like a group therapy session than anything else. And so I think probably from afar, if you actually watched it, you'd be like, oh my God, this is crazy. And then what it comes out of it is like lots of great best practices and sort of ideas, but it's a lot of just sharing of kind of what's going on. It's interesting, and I actually would maybe make this productive for everybody listening in. Is like there's a great lesson here of, and I think virtual has made this possible. It would have been impossible to get all of our schedules to align in the real world to be able to kind of get together, share best practices, kind of make progress on industry ideas. But virtually, it's much more trivial. And I think every single function, every single person has the potential for being able to do that with their community of peers, inside or outside the company. The benefit of peers outside the company is that we're basically getting to learn from a 15 times greater number of experiments happening than any one company would be able to go and do. And so we all, I think, collectively probably share similar values around taking risks, failing fast, iterating, A/B testing, all these kind of aspects that kind of come from more of an engineering culture. And now what we're actually doing is with literally operations and culture in this fairly abnormal work environment. And so, Slack might try an experiment with a certain day off policy, and then we go and implement it and figure out, okay, maybe we want to tune certain things here and change things around. Jen is experiencing something around how do you motivate employees better, and we can go learn from that. And so I think it's a great way to literally have an order of magnitude more experiments than what you would be able to do within your organization, and then be able to bring whichever ones of those work the best into your own company. And so I think the more that you can connect with your peers out there, I think ends up being super helpful in this environment.
I think there are two important points from what you all just shared. One is that you don't have to be a CEO group to create a Slack group and learning community. And I think in times of crisis, people often feel isolated, alone, put a lot of pressure on themselves. And so being able to share is important. I also think what you just said about the importance of matching what you do to your company's values earlier is really critical. So just because Jen does something at PagerDuty doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work at HubSpot, but I can learn bits and pieces of it and tailor. And so I like the idea of just kind of taking the pieces that work and match with your culture and values and what your customers actually need to make things work for you.
Yeah, and I think there's been multiple times where somebody on the call has had an idea that feels totally like it would never work in our culture, and then we don't adopt it. And so and that is what makes us have a plurality of organizations and environments, which is great, because then people get to decide what kind of environment do you want to join. Do you want to be in an all remote organization? Do you want to be in an organization that's still going to bias toward offices? Do you want to be in an organization that has certain kinds of ways of executing, and that's I think what makes this industry so exciting.
Absolutely, I love that. Let's talk a little bit about, we talked about your learning community of CEOs. We haven't talked about your teams. I guess, how have running your teams changed respectively? And that can be as specific as tools, tips. Obviously, Slack and Zoom must feature prominently, as well as Box and PagerDuty. That's just part of the rules. But also just in general, are you looking for different skill sets? Are you valuing different things? Is your leadership team meeting differently? Would love to just hear kind of tactically how you're making your teams work. Eric, if you wouldn't mind starting off, and then we'll go to Jen.
Yeah, sure. I think during this pandemic crisis, first of all of our employees, we all want to pick up the best with the tools. That's why we'll use Slack or Box or PagerDuty. That's a given. And in particular, you look at the productivity. There's no productivity loss. Actually, productivity-wise, a little bit better. And also, given that we all know we all work from home, a lot of meetings, I think the employee engagement also is getting better. However, the problem is the process of practice is we got to change. Over the weekend, and very likely I would tell our employees, please do not schedule a meeting, or do not send a Slack message, and that's very necessary, right? You got to take a break during the weekend, right? We got to look at everything from our employee perspective, and also listen to the feedback. It's every week, and we try to solicit the feedback from our employees. What can we do more to take care of them? Not only our employees, but also their families. Because the reason why we all work from home, mental health, anxiety, depression, that's a huge problem. This is something totally new. That's why we got to think about it proactively, learn from others, partner with others, how to fix those kind of issues we never had experience before. So that's why we got to change our internal practice to focus on those new problems like mental health.
I think that's such an important point, Eric. A question for you on the data side of things. If someone is watching this and wondering, how often are you surveying your employees to get that data? Are you doing weekly surveys, monthly surveys? Have you increased the cadence? Give us a sense of how you're handling that at Zoom.
So in terms of the survey, actually, we do that very often. And, such when the pandemic crisis hit us, first of all, we did a survey And as we keep doing that, and nowadays, not only do we survey for our employees, but also want to understand their feedback about the family as well. So that's one way, we have used the survey tools. And also we keep doing that in the meetings, right? Almost every meeting after meeting is over, I also want to understand what's the feedback from our employees. From time to time, we want our employees also be proactive to tell us rather than we just want to ask them, right? I think that solution works so well. Employees, they share all the ideas because they learn from others. Like when I learn something from my 3 peers, I can share with our team. They're also doing something similar. I think it's pretty healthy now in terms of new ideas and new surveys.
I love that. Thanks for sharing. And I love the idea of getting families in on the action. So we're not just thinking about how to support employees, but really thinking about holistically. When you're working from home, often your kids, partners, dogs, pets, Lenny, of course, can't forget Lenny, are in on the conversation. And so you just have to be thoughtful about making sure you're solving for the household, not just the person who's employed by your company. Jen, how's your team faring and what are you doing that's working to scale your org in the middle of a pandemic?
Yeah, well, similar to Eric, we're using a lot of the best tools in the market to help us connect. I mean, we're huge Slack users. We're obviously big Zoom fans and Zoom users. We're using Box. So tooling that works interoperably very well together is really important because you don't have an IT person at your fingertips when you're at home. So everything has to be easy and intuitive for our employees. From a leadership perspective, though, one of the things I learned traveling a lot as a leader and also commuting from one city to another for work for a period of time is that constant connectivity is super important. So not just the scheduled meetings and the scheduled one-on-ones, but the organic check-ins, the pulse checks, touching base with people to check in and see how they are, really assess their state of mind, make sure that not only am I doing that with my direct reports, but they're doing it with each other because you don't have the water cooler conversation. You don't have the drink together after a meeting anymore. And so you have to be a lot more intentional. And when I was on the road a lot, I knew that if I didn't speak to my daughter twice a day, if I didn't speak to my husband every evening, that things got harder and harder, small problems got bigger, easy wins were harder to get to, et cetera. So that constant tapping in and just checking in, whether you do that through Slack or you do that in person, is really important. Also sort of flipping the dialogue on its head. So every conversation I have with an individual in my team starts with, how are you? And they will usually say, well, this is about the business or that about my team. I say, no, I ask, how are you? How are you doing? To get a window into, their state of mind, how they're feeling about things, how they're physically traveling, like just how things are going, so that I know where the starting point is for that conversation, where we need to focus our time. Research has been really important. And I found that our teams, they start to complain about quote unquote survey fatigue. And so just even shifting the mindset to thinking about research and about learning. And research has a cadence. You don't just spot check randomly. You actually try and build on the knowledge base over time. So having more of a research mindset and a learning mindset's been important. We got kind of lucky being a little bit smart. We had transitioned some of our engagement research to doing it through an inclusion lens, meaning you look at engagement through the lens of how employees self-identify. And that's helped us get a better picture around how employees who are alone are dealing with the pandemic, how employees with large households are dealing with the pandemic, and what the differences are in between, how the size of a team maybe impacts how they're feeling, how their role specifically or the department they're in impacts their situation. So being able to slice and dice that data, not just from the perspective of traditional demographics, but how they identify themselves, has been important. And, lastly, I just think, like, I'm not a very patient person. I think one common trait in the CEO is we tend to be very impatient. We tend to underestimate the effort required to get to an outcome, and overestimate and also underestimate the time and money it's going to take to get there. And we're lucky that we have brilliant teams that sort of equalize that for our employees. But I just found that it's been really hard to determine how long something might take now, because in many cases we're more productive, and likewise how much both negative or positive impact an effort might have on the team. That, like, we almost have to look at that with a beginner's mind, because all bets are off. Everything has changed. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that's really intellectually stimulating. Like, as hard as this has all been, it's been a really interesting time to be running a company. But I do love it when one of my peers gets on the weekly call and says, I don't know about you guys, but I am dog tired, because that vulnerability is important too. It has been both very stimulating and very exhausting at the same time.
How does that characterization feel to you, Erin? Does that feel like Jen is reading your mind at home? I know you're not a huge morning person, and so are your kind of rhythms completely thrown off by not knowing what day and time it is at any given time?
Yeah, definitely have that reality, and also deep appreciation for underestimating / not even trying to estimate the amount of time something takes. I think I'd be too stressed out if I tried to accurately predict things of what it took. But I think to the kind of core of the question for us, there's probably just been two probably big meta things that have the team and we've tried to do. Is the first is one that we benefit from for years, which is just like good technology decisions over a really long period of time. And so we often feel that your culture will map to your technology stack. And that seems like incredibly either dystopian or just very dispassionate. But the reality is that if you have tools like a Slack or a Zoom for communication, or a PagerDuty for real-time transparency, the company actually starts to operate differently than what you would if you were on a different set of technologies. And so your culture and the way you execute and the way you operate actually marries with whatever technology choices that you've made. And so in a culture like ours, where we're an entirely all cloud company, we're using only modern tools, where we have a high degree of openness and transparency, that allows us to move more quickly, make decisions faster, communicate more effectively. And that's been super helpful. And then from a cultural standpoint, operational standpoint, what we've really tried to do is, can we just remove all of the stuff that kind of started to creep up in a world of when you went to the office and so much of your communication was analog, you had to build all of these systems, all of this hierarchy, all of these layers to make sure that you could cascade information, cascade decisions, get people on the same page. And so in a world where everything's virtual, which is where we are right now, at least for the foreseeable future, all that goes away. So you have to actually adapt the way you operate so you don't actually make it unnecessarily difficult to operate in an environment that actually has just become streamlined because of being virtual. And so we've had to sort of figure out, like, well, how should we do our quarterly business reviews? Is there a way to make that more efficient? How should we do our weekly e-staff meetings? Is there a way to make that more efficient? Maybe we don't need as many reviews in the business because, as Stewart was talking, about some of the asynchronous use cases, there's just way easier ways to get access to the information, because you don't think that you have to get into a meeting room just to be able to communicate or just to be able to convey information. So it's actually, I think, and certainly the longer this goes on, I think you're actually going to start to see like management science begin to change, because we're going to recognize how much of our world was built out from this industrial way of managing businesses that was, frankly, built because you didn't have any digital technology. Now in a world where everything is digital, everything's virtual, we're probably going to find out that, like, well, maybe you don't need as many layers in a hierarchy. Maybe teams can actually be larger. Maybe the communication is actually way flatter, and you want to make sure that, like, anybody in the organization from the intern on up is going to be able to make as many key decisions as anybody else. And so we're starting to figure out, like, how much of this can actually be maintained as a longstanding kind of impact in the way that we work. And that's the part that I'm most excited about is just the fact that actually I think we think we can run our business differently going forward because of a lot of the lessons that we've learned in this environment.
I love that. So Erin touched on kind of the market opportunity at hand. Jen talked about the constant connectivity, and Eric certainly talked about the fact that work is extending into the home as well. Stewart, building on those, obviously best-in-class tools are critical. How do you make sure that in the attempt to build a human connection that people aren't always on? And how do you make sure that people are getting a degree of life-work balance, especially when, as Eric mentioned, there's a lot of mental health stress going on in the world?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think to a large extent, we're still figuring it out. I think certainly in this time and probably in normal times too, but not to as pronounced an extent, there's just a real difference between how it shows up for people, right? Some people, they like all of the members of their family and they have right amount of members of the family and the right sized house. And, they kind of saved the commute. They've given themselves a little bit more flexibility. On the other hand, some people are like, I would not have rented this apartment if I knew I was going to have to spend all day here in this tiny little box. Our whole team in Japan, just like the country is not built for people to stay in their apartments all day. So it shows up very differently. Some people are, honestly better off individually in this environment. Some people are more or less unaffected, and some people are really in crisis. But there was a really interesting set of answers, and I was actually taking some notes because it's something we think about all the time. And I remember I did a yoga class once, and the instructor said something like, saying you're too stiff to do yoga is like saying you're too thirsty to drink any water, which made an impression. But it often feels like we're too busy to make fundamental improvements to the way that we work. So a lot of the stuff that Aaron was mentioning, those questions, is there a more effective way to run this meeting? Do we need this review? Do we need this QBR? Should we be doing things differently? Ongoing question. And you really have to force the discipline to ask that. And I don't mean you as an executive necessarily, I just mean like one does, everyone does. Because it's very easy to just kind of engage in all this frantic activity and not make some of the changes that would deliver real results. But we got a couple different things going on here. So we started off on surveys and culture and people, and I think they're all really related. The questions that were interesting, or the things that were interesting to me in the surveys that we didn't have before, is like, no one, I don't think, put on their employee engagement surveys, I feel lonely, 1 to 5. Like that wasn't something that we asked before. And honestly, maybe we should have, or at least there should have been some samples of those kinds of questions. But without that kind of live pulse feedback, and obviously you get it anecdotally as well, conversations, and people can synthesize those conversations, but the combination of the qualitative and quantitative look at what's going on is essential, not just for are people happy and happiness equals productivity or something like that, but when redesigning the processes or trying new experiments, there's a real interplay between how people are feeling and what's going on in their lives and how this process works. So I'm envious of every time someone says, well, we got rid of all the meetings, or we banned slide decks, and now we do the 6-page Amazon memo thing with perfect discipline, because I would love to get to that level. It's a little bit like, I know what I should eat and I shouldn't eat. It's still kind of hard as a normal human being to do the right thing, or to get enough exercise or get enough sleep. But I think there's more of a willingness to engage in that kind of conversation, whereas people might have been less willing to question it before. But there's probably even more of a time crunch and like more constraints that make people feel like they don't have time to, that essentially they're too stiff to do yoga.
I think that's spot on. Actually, we spent some time with your team, Stewart, and one of the things we have a tendency at HubSpot, probably due to impatience that we all talked about, we try and always program our way out of things. So for example, like parents are more stressed than usual, caregivers are more stressed than usual, people who are at home solo, let's build a program for it. And one of the things that one of your team members said was clarity is kindness. Like sometimes just saying to people, like, I'm having a tougher time right now and I'm going to navigate it, or I'm canceling this meeting because I'm going to see what life is like without it. That unto itself takes some courage of conviction and can be a good thing as you're learning and growing together. And so I think one of the things that we've put a bigger focus on is like, don't do more, do less, and have the courage to cancel a few things and see how it goes. And it doesn't mean you have to cancel everything forever, but it does mean we have to try some things that might get us to a better system or team or process. Cool. Let's switch gears. I want to make sure we talk about, we were all reckoning with COVID-19 and its impact on the world. And then in June, with the advent of George Floyd's death and also ongoing police brutality in America, racial injustice came into focus more than ever. And so we'd love to understand how you and your respective companies are making societal equality a priority, and how you're supporting folks who may be, and particularly employees of color, who may be more impacted by this than others. If it's okay, Stewart, I'll start with you, given that we're over with you already.
Yeah, sure. There's a lot. So I'm going to skip over some stuff, or I don't know, foundational philosophical beliefs about the role of business and capitalism, which is essentially to create something that you care about. I think, that's the reason people start businesses and engage in businesses. And I think one of the things that's been important for us from the beginning is we want to have the kind of impact on the world that we would like to have. I should have a certain blood pressure, a certain cholesterol reading or something like that. That's not the point of my life. The business should make lots of money. That's not necessarily the point of the business. And we as individuals and we as a company show up in the world and make a difference regardless of what we're doing. Like, there's always some kind of impact. So I think maybe we started with a culture that was a little bit more conscious of that, or maybe it had more emphasis. And the impact of that was there's a lot more expectation. So employees look to the company for a response or have expectations about, something happening, we should make a public statement, or, what are we going to do about this? And we've taken a really experimental approach to this whole area broadly since the very beginning. I think the most important initial reaction in June was just listening, like more time for feedback, and making sure that people are heard and acknowledged, because it had an enormous impact on a lot of people. It had an enormous impact on me as well, but there's a lot of people who, are almost going through a crisis. And then meanwhile, like, this meeting is still happening and we're supposed to do this presentation for the customer, or there's some deadline approaching, and those can get really disconnected and people can be very heads down in whatever work thing was supposed to be happening. And meanwhile, one of their colleagues is in a completely different world. So the listening was really important. But I said experimental approach. I think there's a lot of stuff. So we had speaker series, we had some listening sessions, we had scaled up our volunteer time off programs to give people a chance to engage. There was, we probably did, I started off an earnings call, our Q1 earnings, with talking about white supremacy, which is just like not normal quarterly earnings prepared remark content. And
maybe the question is, maybe it should be, right? Maybe that's one of the things that we're learning from all of this, is that maybe it should be more regular course as part of not just our employee calls, but our investor conversations as well. Sometimes I think on these issues, when we talk about all the things that are hard and that we can't change, then people are like, yeah, that's why I'm not going to do anything. So I would love to hear, Aaron, Jen, and Eric, if you wouldn't mind sharing one thing that you've done that you think has worked or has changed your opinion, or a book you've read, something positive, not that everything is sunshine and rainbows, but I would love to just make sure that people watching this kind of take action and consider carrying action forward versus sitting on the sidelines. So Aaron, maybe start with you.
Yeah, well, I would say first of all, Silicon Valley has many issues that we have to reckon with around systemic injustice and the pernicious inequality that can exist. I mean, if you look at venture capital funding of startups, overwhelmingly goes to white founders. So we have lots of challenges that we have to reckon with as an industry. I will say that I was proud to see how many companies in this industry stepped up, in this environment. Everybody on this call, I know, contributed both personally and through their businesses to important causes that are tackling racial injustice in the country. For both near and long-term, reform of many of these issues. So I think we as organizations, had to do our part to make sure that we're, both making sure we're supporting our local communities, and as well as across the country, make sure we're supporting our employees, giving the right kind of space for people to be, dealing with and grappling with these issues that personally can be, very, very personally disruptive, and so creating the right kind of environment for them. And then I think working internally on our own inclusion and diversity initiatives, making sure that we're continuing to put more emphasis on this internally, and whether it's hiring, the way that we set our cultures, the way that we build out our management teams, to our board of directors, I think there's a lot of work happening and a lot of introspection continuing to happen within our organizations that to try and move this forward. But I will say that along with Stewart, we want to make sure this is not a one-time event. That we just happen to focus on it in 2020, but that this becomes and continues as a major focus of our organizations, as I think it has been over the past many years, as we've had this more I think talked about much more openly.
I think that's the right push. And I think many of you probably saw the tweet that said, make the hire, write the check. At a certain point, you've got to be walking the walk versus just reading the books or textbooks and thinking about it philosophically. We've all got to be part of that change. Jen, what's one thing that's worked well at PagerDuty on this front?
Being very programmatic and intentional to both hold ourselves accountable on all of our inclusion, diversity, and equity activities, and measure and manage them with the same rigor we do any business imperative. And we've seen success as a result of that. We also have seen areas where we have more work to do. And again, like any other strategy in a business, you're not going to get it all right, but you have to demand a level of focus. You have to then fund those programs. You have to staff them with leadership. And then you have to run the cadence and the rigor around how are we doing? Where are we versus where we said we were going to be? And so to support that, this past week, we actually released an annual report on our diversity data. And that was partially to show the market sort of how we think about it, but also to hold ourselves accountable. Those numbers are now out there. We're going to show improvement against those numbers. We are not doing as good of a job as we could do. We do not have a Black person on our board, although we do have board members who are people of color and who are underrepresented in a gender balanced board. So we've made a commitment to change that. And we've also made a commitment, and we're funding the process to try and ensure that our underrepresented people actually can matriculate to leadership positions within the company as well, because it's not enough to just have representation in your individual contributor community. You have to build representation at every layer of leadership. And so being maniacal about it is really important, but also standing with the community who's hurting. And I think it was very important for us to come out early and say that we stand with the Black community, but to show what that means by being there with them now and helping them drive change through both leadership change, behavioral change, clear representation, and financial support for programs that are going to move the needle.
I love that. Thanks so much for sharing. Eric, bring us home with something that's working at Zoom.
I think, first of all, I second Jen's comments. To hold us accountable, to hold the entire high-tech community accountable is very important. The reason why Silicon Valley is a worldwide innovation center for so many years because of its inclusive culture. It's very important. That's why when we realize that not only did we hire the first chief diversity officer, but also we want to fix the engineer talent pool problem, let's say from Black community. That's why we partnered with Cleveland University to sponsor the internship, try to get more engineer talents, try to be more inclusive. That's something very important for us.
I think that ends us on a great note, which is that the folks building, marketing, servicing, selling your product need to reflect the breadth of customers that you want to attract. So I want to say thank you. Wrap us up quickly with quick tips from Stewart. We want to make sure we're doing yoga. Don't avoid it. Drink water, do yoga, create change within your organization. Aaron recommends listening to some great emo punk and also living your values during times of crisis. Jen, this is plane travel, and we love her for that. We love her for honesty and candor, but also recommends constant connectivity, which is great. And Eric, in addition to cheering for the Golden State Warriors, which is a must, recommends that you make sure you're thinking about checking in not just with employees, but with their family members too. So thank you all for your leadership, for your insights. You are all wonderful. We appreciate you so much.
You are the best moderator.
Yes.
Thank you.
Seriously.
Thank you all so much. You are all wonderful. Thanks so much. And thanks to the Slack team for having us.
Thanks,
Cheers. Have a great day, everyone.
Stewart, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Miss you guys. See you later.
Thank you.